Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Elizabeth Corbett, President of Enterprise Sales at AE Global. Thank you very much for joining me today, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Elizabeth, I always like to start to get to know the person a little bit, get a little bit of background. What was it that brought you to the cannabis industry?
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I certainly had a lot of exposure to cannabis when you grow up in Oregon, illegally at that point, obviously. My background is in developing packaging solutions for a lot of different industries, particularly health and beauty. And I was working, and I did a lot of stuff with pharma, health and beauty, premium products like Tiffany and Estee Lauder, Starbucks, and the state of Washington was one of the first two states that legalized cannabis. And people always forget that Washington passed it at the exact same time that Colorado did. And one of my health and beauty guys that I was doing a bunch of work with went to work for Tilray, which at the time was the largest cannabis company in the world, and called me up on a second day, and he goes, "Hey Beth," he goes, I need some help. He goes, "I need to figure out how to package weed." And I was like, okay, right. And so it's funny in hindsight because I remember the thing, like none of the stuff we were doing was child resistant. I mean, like none of it. And a lot of it was probably, honestly, the products weren't that good. There were just no diversity. Edibles really smelled and tasted like weed. And so, we just had a lot of fun figuring it out. I got to work with them when Canada was legalizing cannabis. And that was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had, because over 11 months, they changed the rules every single month. So we'd have something ready to go and then be like, nope, can't do that. And then we'd have something ready to go and be like, not, you can't do that. It was a pretty heartbreaking process, actually, because Canada did a really good job of making it make you feel like somebody was buying something illegal, right? You could barely have a brand on it. You couldn't have any color. You couldn't have any texture. They still were making it look like something that you should feel bad about buying or kind of illicit. But that's how I fell into it. And uh, I don't know why I fell in love so much with the industry, but that's how it started.
How did you get into packaging?
Oh, so my background is graphic design and print production. And when I first was on the end user side. So I worked for companies like Safeco. I ran 5 of the product lines for their financial services department here in Seattle. I live part-time in Seattle and part-time in South Florida. I'm in Seattle right now. It's really cold. And although it's probably not as cold as it where you are, David.
Yeah, it's brutal today.
Today it was 21. So you would think that was like balmy, right?
Oh yeah. It was, at least it was 10. So at least it was, above 0. We're happy.
21 and sunny. So there you go. Anyway, I was managing a bunch of print production. Obviously, I had a print budget at the time of about $3.5 million, but I was just doing traditional like commercial printing, brochures, that sort of thing. And I ended up going to work for one of the paper mills that I worked with a lot of times because I would specify the paper. And as I got more in depth with them, found out I really loved the packaging side of paper. And then they asked me to start their global packaging group. So the company was Nina Paper. It was a fabulous experience. And I got to work with people like Tiffany, building their blue paper, and got to be really involved when they changed the pattern for only the third time in their 150 plus year history. got to work with a lot of brands, not only thinking about how to differentiate your product on the paper side for packaging, but also security measures. So those were a lot of the different, I mean, you can do a lot of things with different patterns and fibers and that sort of thing. And then I ended up realizing that I wanted to work on more than just the paper. I wanted to build the whole product and I wanted to be that complete solution. So that's how I ended up eventually a couple stops, but eventually ended up with AE Global because I want to be able to develop the whole solution for the customer. And whether that, and I want to be able, it's interesting. One of the things I love about cannabis is that it's very similar. Probably the only industry that's similar is to health and beauty because of the fact that you have so many different form factors and so many different kinds of products. And with that comes a lot of challenge, but to me that makes it fun, right? So you're trying to make a product that meets, different regulations. You're trying to make a product that protects, package that protects the product. You're trying to make something that represent it well on shelf, that it still meets somebody's budget, that you're keeping in mind opportunities for automation. You're trying to keep in mind opportunities for streamlining because one of the biggest challenges of the industry is because it's not federally legalized. Every state has their own, challenges and their own regulations. So I mean, that's one of the greatest things about the cannabis industry is that at least on the packaging side, you will never be bored.
Why did you want to be able to develop the whole solution?
Um, I my personal mantra is find a way to yes. As my personal mantra. And we talked before is that I'm an optimist at heart. And so I don't ever want to say, oh, I can't do that. I guess that's probably really it. I want to be your whole solution. If you need a custom jar, if you need a custom box, if you are looking for different flexible options, if you're looking to do something that's really different on the hardware side, I want to be able to provide that whole solution. And if I can't, I want to find the person who can. And that's really important to me. I want to help. I love helping people find solutions. I don't want to be the, oh, I can only do the paper on your box.
Is that what helped you stick with it during those early days working with Tilray? I mean, it just sounds like, you're being faced with challenge after challenge, roadblock after roadblock. And I mean, it would be understandable if you're just like, you know what? Tiffany's was a lot easier over there.
Um, I don't know. These are good questions. Uh, it's more fun, right? It is. It's a lot more fun if you're facing challenges and and I am the person who uh like if I hit a roadblock or whatever or something frustrating, I'll have like a tiny little internal blow up and then I'm like, okay, what do we do to go fix that? What's that next challenge? I think that's way more fun. I think that's why I stuck with it. It was new, it was creative. I do believe, on a personal level, I do believe in the power of the plant. And that is, I, I truly, I've always said I couldn't sell nuclear weapons. And so I do feel better if I'm involved in an industry where I feel like whatever I'm involved in is good for humanity. And I do truly believe in the power of the plant, and I believe in what it can do, particularly for pain management and addressing people with anxiety issues. And I look at, I happen to know that my parents use it for sleeping, and they're 80 and 82. They're a big fan of wild gummies, so call out for wild. I do believe in the power of that. I'm really interested long term of what it can do for pain management on a transdermal basis. I think that's going to be amazing. I personally don't do well with any kind of opioids pain medication. Whenever I've had any kind of minor surgery or something, I can't take it. I would rather have pain than be ill. And I don't think I'm that unusual. There's probably a lot of people like me.
No, I
So
I agree. I had the same reaction the first time I took a powerful opioid. I was sitting on the couch and I was just like, "Oh, okay, I understand this, and I don't need it anymore." I would rather
Yeah, I
heal.
actually, I'm getting my knee replaced this summer. Very exciting, which needs to be done. And I'm going to do a lot of research beforehand about what I'm supposed to do about the pain management because I don't do well with pain pills. So we'll see what happens. I'll let you know.
Well, that surgery has gotten just. I mean, my I had family that recently had that surgery as well. I mean, she was walking like half hour after surgery. It was incredible.
It is incredible, but again, I do believe in the power of the plant. I'm a wimp. Personally a wimp, and so I've had I know people who can consume just amazing levels, and there's no judging. Um, I do think it's interesting that we're hearing. I find Americans tend to go all the way in one direction. So now all of a sudden alcohol is super, super bad, right? Um, and and who knows where the truth lies? It always lies somewhere in the middle. But it is nice to see that people are addressing that there are things that cannabis can do that should be viewed in a positive light. And there needs to be a ton more research, a ton more.
Well, that's one thing. I don't know. Have you been encouraged by that? Because particularly, I believe it's Washington University. There has been a lot of research that
Wazoo.
is, yeah, within what the last 5-10 years. I mean, I understand that that comes with opening up regulations a little bit, but it's been really encouraging to see actual studies published um, based on research that's outside of, I don't know, I've always taken this and it's always worked for me.
Both Wazoo and Oregon State University both have, which makes sense. I mean, they're both, you know, and what's interesting, they're both big agriculture states, and those are both ag schools. So it makes a ton of sense. They both have really good, um, especially Washington State, excellent veterinary schools. And so they're using it for a lot of testing in veterinary, which is great because they're also, I think that there's a ton of opportunity for what that can do in animal welfare as well. And you're right, it goes with opening up. Um, those schools haven't been able to do the research before because otherwise they could end up losing funding, licensing, all kinds of stuff from the federal government.
No, I believe that there is a tremendous opportunity in the veterinary industry as well. And right now, I mean, really, there's even less information out there for how you could treat animals with cannabis. And just off of my personal experience, I know that my vets all want to know more. And they're like, I want to be able to tell you that that'll probably work, but I can't, I don't have any basis for that. So I would like to get away
Correct.
from that sort of trial and error phase.
It would be interesting to see. So I just because of I do packaging in other industries. Pet is one of them, and one of the interesting things in pet is that the really there's about six companies that kind of own everything in pet care. There's like Mars, General Mills, believe it or not, Smuckers. There's six kind of big companies that own that market, and they're the companies that have the most research. So when, it's, you have, I've probably been scammed. But we mentioned that one of my dogs has been fighting cancer and she's doing great, but we put her on the farmer's dog, which is $11 a day. And he goes, well, if it makes you feel good, that's great, Beth. He goes, we don't really have any research. He goes, because all the research has been paid for by the really big companies. And they do have valid research. It would be amazing if those companies could do research on what hemp or cannabis can do within, food or, pain management or anxiety management, because that's a real issue with dogs. That would be really interesting to see those companies be able to do research because I mean, they have the funding, they have the laboratories. That's where the big difference is going to be made.
Jumping back to the packaging side, ever since you started with Tilray, what have been your thoughts on the evolution of packaging? Would you have expected us to come a little bit further as an industry? Are you happy with where we are? Would you like to see a little bit more?
Um, I think one of the most challenging things in this industry is, and this part that is really hard and it's just wasteful and it's such a high cost, is I wish I get that the federal government hasn't done anything real, and that's just what it is, and that's disappointing on one level. I think I really thought that we'd be farther along with that. I think the bigger disappointment is I really wish the states would work together more because it would be better for the industry. It'd be from a cost perspective. Like it's crazy that I have companies that I work with that are in 12 states, and on their edibles, I have to have different, different language on the, let's say, flexible pouches for 12 different states. And so somebody who could have, let's say they have 10 flavors, and instead of 10 SKUs, they have 120 SKUs. That's just really wasteful. It's a high cost, right? I mean, what I could do from them from an efficiency perspective. So that's probably the thing that I'm the most frustrated and disappointed by is not seeing that collaboration among the states and be like, do you realize what we could be doing for the industry if if we could at least get closer to what our regulations are. Um, I think that part is disappointing. Um, there's not as much automation as I would hope for, but I realize that part of that is just the fact that you have to make the product in the state. So, if you're GTI and you're in Illinois, you can do incredible automation that you're probably not going to do in Nevada, right? Because Illinois is a big state just by nature. You've got a really big footprint. You've got, great, um, you've got great market share. Well, Nevada is a much smaller market, right? A lot more diverse. You don't have the same, market position. Nobody does. And so everything's going to be done by hand. So I think that that's one of the things that is frustrating. I think that one of the things I think that there are, I'm just trying to think of some of I mean, those are probably two of my bigger things.
Well,
And
when it
go
comes to
ahead.
the states working together, is it because they have such tunnel vision in getting their own market rights that they're not willing to collaborate? Because I mean, just because the federal government says we're going to do it on a state level doesn't mean the states still can't all work together.
Right. No, I totally agree. I think it's funny. I think you have states that, and it's so different. I got to tell you, every state is really different, and they all think, well, my state's better. The way I do it is better. Right. Um, if I was going to pick two states that I think have done it the worst, it'd be California and New York. Right.
Why is
Um,
that?
um, just there were part of the reason why you had so many brands get in real financial trouble in California was so one of the things I like about the state of Washington is when they set it up, they combined it with the liquor control board. And so they had to follow a lot of the same rules. So here, when you're selling alcohol to a bar, they have to pay you, I think, within like 72 hours, right? And so they made cannabis follow the same rule. So nobody got really over their skis. You didn't have a dispensary that was, you know, getting over their skis in terms of how much money they owed somebody, and then that person's in financial trouble because they can't get paid, and then they don't want to cut off the dispensary because that's their, distribution. Well, California didn't do that. And so you ended up having brands who had, big dispensaries owe them, 90 days worth of product. And California thought, okay, I'm doing this right. And I think that every state kind of thought they were going to do their own thing. There's things that I think are good in some states that would be interesting to look at others and vice versa. I wish they could at least get their head together on just what you need to put on the package, right? So, and there's so many things, like in some states, there's so much information that has to be put on there that you have to have an extended label and you have to have a secondary carton because there's so much stuff required. There's really no way not to do that. Um, and I just wish that you if California and Massachusetts could sit down and have a conversation and be like, so why are you guys requiring this? And why are you guys requiring this? It doesn't seem to me that they have those conversations, at least not from what I've seen.
If you were talking to your typical cannabis startup right now, what are some best practices or things that are maybe often missed or neglected when it comes to a packaging perspective that would help that startup, be set up for success?
Mm. Well, a lot of the things apply to any industry. Is do you have a really good understanding of your target cost of goods? That's one of the biggest things, right? And making sure that you've allowed enough time for the whole process. And, when somebody comes to me in September and says, "Hey, I want to do, this custom item and it's something I can only make offshore and Chinese New Year's coming," and they're like, and I want to do custom tooling and I want it by December 31st. And I'm like, there are many things that I would love in this world. I'd like to wake up a supermodel, but that's not going to happen. And I'm not going to be able to make that happen in 3.5 months. So having a pretty good idea of your target cost of goods, um, having like let's say that you're doing an edible. Let's say you're doing an edible. Have a have an open mind about um, what are things that we could do to reduce the overall labor. That's a big thing. I have people, I recently had somebody where somebody showed me some amazing, this idea where they wanted this like high-end chocolate and it was going to have 9 cavities and it was going to be everything. And I was like, so have you talked to your operations department? Because this is marketing. And I was like, because they're going to look at that and they're going to hate you because they're going to be like, how am I going to pack that out efficiently? I think it's really important to make that marketing and operations is in the same room, and honestly, probably procurement, right? It's like, so what's marketing's dream? What's the real budget? And how are you guys going to pack this out? Because I want to help all of those three find the right vision. And I don't ever want to present something that marketing loves, and then procurement is like, well, that's double my budget. Or operations is looking at it and being like, I have no idea how I'm going to pack that out efficiently. I'm going to have to hire 10 more people. So I think that those are, I mean, but again, that works in any industry, right?
Oh, it does. I mean, is packaging more of an afterthought in cannabis?
It happens in everything. It's not just cannabis. Um, I think that yeah, and the big thing we talked a little bit is, what's your timeline? And sometimes we come up with stage one and stage two, right? Okay, I get you want to get the product to market. Here's an item that I have found that's a stock item that will work for us to get this to market now. And then here's the plan for getting your custom item out. And so maybe the first part of the timeline is 3 months, and that's going to get this part in, right? And then then we have a timeline for a 9 month launch for your custom. So remember I said my dream is find a way to yes, right? That's my mantra. And so then I did find a YTS, and I'm a huge fan of custom tooling and custom bottles, jars, whatever it is, because it really makes your product stand out on shelf. And oftentimes the unit cost isn't going to be any different had you bought the stock item in whatever those quantities are be. It's just the tooling cost, finding a way to amortize that, and the timeline for production. But then your product's going to stand out. I do a ton of work in custom health and beauty, like hair care. It's the same concept, right? I can't tell you how many trade shows I walk through now. This is true in cannabis. It's true in hair care. It's true in anything where you walk around and there are very few items that stand out on shelf to me. And as markets become more mature, Washington and California would be good examples of that, and actually Oregon, it's really important for your cannabis product to stand out, right? There's a reason you're going to go, oh, that's cool. And your product can stand out no matter what the form factor. It could be a pouch. There is a brand of gummies here called Pioneer Squares. Um, I can't take those. They kick my butt. But the first time I ever saw them, and they're in really cool flexible packaging, I was like, oh, that's really cool. What's that? Right? So, to get your person to get, and especially, post COVID, people spend more time in dispensaries again, and you want them going around going, "Oh, that's cool. What's that?" Right? Same thing like going to a liquor store and seeing a really cool bottle or a really cool label. Um, Cannabis is very similar that way. Same with cosmetics or health and beauty. It's just a matter of making sure that they've given the right timeline. I think the other big thing that I would say that we haven't talked about much is how when I'm working on something with somebody is like, so what's your sustainability directive? Is that something that's important to you? Because there are a lot of different things that we can do from that perspective. We can, if it's a carton, we can make sure it's got post-consumer content, or same with pouch. Is it something that you already have in market and I have a way to maybe right size it? Maybe we can reduce the size by 20 or 25%. I'm going to save you money and I'm also using less substrate. We personally, AE Global has a facility in the Dominican Republic where we gather and process what would have been ocean-bound plastic and bring that back to Miami to be able to be used in new packaging. So, is there an opportunity to use one of our form factors that uses ocean-bound plastic? Or if that doesn't work, maybe we can do plastic offsets that we partner with Repurpose Global. All of those things are part of the conversation, and it's best to have that conversation at the beginning versus, I people are better about talking about that in the beginning. I won't say who, but I did a whole 7 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, there was a company that I did a whole brand launch with, and I'm sustainability minded anyway, just coming from the paper industry and growing up in Oregon. And their marketing department called me as all the packaging had already been produced and said, "Hey, is there anything sustainable about our packaging that I could do a press release about?" And in that case, there was. I had chosen FSC certified paper. There was some post-consumer content. There were some things I was able to share with them, but that's terrible, right? You never want that to be, you never want that to be the conversation at the end. That should be your conversation at the beginning.
Well, and I definitely want to talk more about the sustainability efforts because I think they're very inspiring. But before we move on to that, I just wanted to ask: is part of the issue that, and not just unique to cannabis, it's anywhere, right? Anytime you talk to anyone that makes anything, an engineer, a grower, they think that the product will sell itself. Is that the problem in cannabis?
Um, I I will say yes from the perspective. Not everybody. Some people are really. I do a lot of work with GTI, and GTI is all about their brand, right? But they're also one of the most successful cannabis companies in the world, so maybe that says something, right?
Right. Hmm.
Um, I've worked as states go legal, you end up having people who think, well, it's going to sell itself because people just want weed, right? And they're going to buy whatever on the shelf. And that was probably true. Like when Illinois went legal, I think that was probably true at the beginning, right? Because people were like lining up around the block and they're just going to take whatever they could get. There was also limitations. Remember? I mean, everybody was out of weed. I mean, you just couldn't get weed. Um, and now most states have a surplus. And so now your product has to be good. Because honestly, I got to tell you, 10 years ago, there was probably a lot of product on shelf in Washington that wasn't awesome. So now the product has to be good. And it really has to represent your brand, and you got to talk to the consumer. You got to educate the consumer. So yeah, I think that there was a time that people thought that it could sell itself, and there's probably, I mean, there are some brands out there that are definitely kind of lower end, right? How would I put that? Um,
Commodity.
Financially accessible. It's a nice way
Oh.
to put it. More financially accessible for whom at that point they're they're just about having a really high THC content and they don't care. I mean, and there are people like that, right?
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Um, and that there is a market for that. But the future of cannabis in terms of growth isn't that market. They've already got that market. The future of cannabis is my mom, right? Who, wanted to go into, had never been high before and wanted to explore it because she wanted to sleep, right? The future of cannabis is me and my sister, who did a little microdose before we climbed Diamond Head last year, right? That's the future of cannabis, and the future of cannabis is the vet who is in a lot of pain or has PTSD and doesn't want to be on opioids, right? That's the future of cannabis. It's not in the guy who wants to get so high that he can't get off his couch. They already have those guys.
The other thing that stood out was when you were talking about packaging that stood out to you. I mean, you're the pro, you've been doing it for a long time. What works best in your eyes when it comes to packaging?
Um, so make sure it really represents the brand, right? Um, don't over package it. And by that, I don't mean like I do some stuff that's really premium brands. It's like a pouch within a carton. I'm not talking about that. I've seen some stuff that was really, really over the top. And most of the over the top packaging is gone because a lot of the companies that did the over the top packaging are out of business because you couldn't afford it, right? Um, uh, I get child resistant packaging and that's necessary. I hate child resistant packaging that I can't open. Um, there are some gummies where you're like, oh wow, that tin's so beautiful, and you're just like, I'm like, telling my husband, can you open this for me? Because I cannot get this open, right?
Oh yeah.
And I'm thinking, how did this ever pass the elderly test? Because the whole thing on CR testing is kids can't open it, and the elderly needs to be able to open it. And I'm like, I have no idea how that passed that. Um, I think one of the big things is make sure it's keeping the product fresh. A lot of people get kind of fancy and particularly with gummies, and there are some tubes and some tins that honestly do not keep the gummy fresh, particularly after it's been opened once. That's kind of basic, right? But form follows function if it's not taking care of the product. Um, one of the funniest things that I dealt with Tilray when Canada went legal was nobody had ever made pre-rolls that then traveled across the country 3,000 miles. And when they would get there, all the stuff was out.
Oh, gotcha.
That's funny, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
and there's been some stuff of that. Like, think about California. What California is like 2,000 miles long, right?
Hmm.
So there's been some funny things that people have had to learn to work with. So for me, packaging is it. It has to be attractive. It has to, gain my eye, but it also has to um, do its job in terms of protecting the product. I also really like packaging that is something that I would feel good about. I can't reveal it, and I'll reveal it when it's launched. But I'm working on a couple things right now where the whole concept of pocketability or pursability, something that I'm going to feel good about opening up at a party, right? And somebody is like,
Okay.
"Hey, buddy, want like a 1 milligram?" Because again, I think microdosing is kind of the future. And to have packaging that a soccer mom going to wine night with my girlfriends and I'm like, hey, you want to try this? It's like a 1 milligram. And it's like, just takes the edge off. I think packaging that makes people feel like they're not dirty, right? We need to make the industry feel um, like I'm not illicit. I'm not breaking the law. I'm not doing something bad.
So how soon might we hear this news?
um, I'm in final tooling on something that's really cool. And I am more than happy to share. And I know my customer would love to share it too.
Hmm.
I'll be able to share it in about 3 months.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
We'll
and the
mark our
cool thing
calendars.
is if you're doing something really cool from the packaging side, also think about what you're going to do on the display side, right? So how are you going to merchandise that in your dispensary? And when you're thinking about your packaging, that's one of the things to think about too. It's like, how are you guys going to merchandise this in a dispensary?
Well, in to that point, when you talk about how it has to align with the brand, how do you have those tough conversations with Or maybe they never come up, but how do you, if they ever did, have a conversation with a client where you're just like, that's what you want, huh? Well, let's give it another think.
Um, some sometimes you produce packaging for somebody that isn't necessarily going to be an Academy Award winner. Um, and sometimes that's what they want. I learned a long time ago, you have to be really careful about your feedback
Hmm.
because that's their baby. And for all you know, their daughter designed it. Um, right?
Yeah.
There are nice ways to work through things. I'm way better at delivering that kind of news now than I was 20 years ago. Maturity and experience. But sometimes it's just asking them, it's like, how did you get to this? Right? Why this form factor? Why this? You know, um, and oftentimes you can find out that there's maybe something they don't love about it, right? You don't know that. I had the opportunity to redesign Tiffany's e-commerce packaging, and the previous experience was really awful. And I remember asking their head of supply chain, and I said, "So is there anything that I can't change on this, right? Because you always want to make sure." And she goes, "Oh no, Beth, we hate it. You can blow it up." Right? But that's a good question to ask is there anything you don't like? And a lot of times you can and ask everybody, ask all the stakeholders, right? It could be asking marketing. It could be a lot of times I learn a lot by talking to the people in operations, right? Is there anything you hate about this? I'm redesigning something for a customer and it's a really, really simple tweak that's going to add about 3 cents to the carton, but their operations department loves me for it. And I've actually recently done that in a CPG as well. And in both cases, I found out about it just by talking to some of the ops people. And then when we presented it to marketing, it was like, hey, this is not going to impact anything. You're still going to love this, but your ops people are literally going to be able to eliminate two bodies. And that's real money. It's
Oh,
real
that's
money and it's
significant.
real speed. And they will like you better.
Was that an actual experience where you said, who designed this? And it was their daughter.
No, I've never. I have had a couple times. Neither one of those. Those are both big companies. Those are both big companies that we were able to do some tweaking. I have had, and I know of somebody who tried, who lost an account because she got a little too aggressive about letting them know what needed to be changed and why, and they had designed it.
I understand. You got that white glove service. You got to be careful.
I always like to say you can't tell them that their baby's ugly.
I mean, that's very true. And that's universal in any industry that you work in.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's true for everything. Or even when, I mean, you could do it from a equipment operations, like, well, who designed this? Well, the owner did. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. High quality work there.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
well, before we go too long, I want to make sure we talk about the sustainability efforts at AE Global because I think it is truly inspiring. When we were at MJ BizCon in Vegas, you were talking about that plant in the Dominican Republic. Could you go a little bit more in depth as to how that was started, the initiatives behind it? And I mean, didn't you find out about it on your first day?
Yeah, it was. So I've been with the company since almost big 4 years in late May. And I will say it's the best place I've ever worked. And they tried for 2 years to get me to go before then, and I should have gone then. But that's okay. Sometimes you find out where you're supposed to be a little later. So we talked about sustainability, and that sustainability, I like to say it's table stakes, and I like to say it's table stakes in any industry. I've done quite a bit of work with Culligan Water, and I started a new project with them at the beginning of last year. And one of the things that really impressed me was on the very first day to look at the new design, a whole new line of products. They had somebody from ESG in the room, and sustainability had to be part of it from the very start. And so our owners, Mike and Jeff, really saw this need to address sustainability early on in the process. And cannabis has been an industry that has had a phenomenal amount of waste in the packaging. And it's unfortunate, but it's anytime you're having to do stuff that's child resistant and you have all of those different form factors, some of that just ends up leading to waste. And there are a lot of things that haven't been able to use like 100% post consumer or whatever that is. So they had an opportunity on my very first day. Um, they had a partner come in who is 4G Recycling. They're one of the oldest recycling families in the industry in waste management, and they brought them forward this amazing project, which was to build a facility in the Dominican Republic for the purpose of gathering and processing what would have been ocean-bound plastic, and then bringing that to Miami to be then converted into a form factor that could be used in other new packaging or other items. And I'll never forget, I raised my hand in the meeting and I was like, well, so what happens when you run out? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, when you gather all the ocean-bound plastic, and they laughed and they were like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, the Dominican Republic has one of the biggest plastic garbage problems in the Caribbean. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Part of it's the jet stream. Part of it's that just in their cooking, they use a lot of oil. And so that all comes in plastic jugs. The other thing that I learned when I was in that meeting is pretty much all of the ocean-bound plastic right now, in terms of efforts, in terms of gathering it, is all in places like Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. It's all in Southeast Asia. And and that's great. I'm not discounting that. But the problem is then you're putting that on a ship and then you're bringing it to the United States. It's that, I mean, that's shipping is still the largest violator to our atmosphere in terms of contributing to global warming. So our facility is the only facility of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, which is a pretty amazing thing, right? So I've also in that process learned that there are some things that you can make with ocean-bound plastic, and there are some things you can't. So we have a product called Easy Lock, which has a plastic tray. It's a CR mechanism, comes in multiple sizes that can be used for things like pre-rolls, hardware, vape carts, that sort of thing. It's not suitable for food contact, which is true for different recycled plastic, but particularly ocean-bound plastic. So there are things that we can use it for. There are things that we can't. It also is really difficult to make ocean-bound plastic with anything that has a really tight hinge, right? So if you've got something, you can't make some things out of 100% ocean-bound plastic just because of the strength of the form factor. And so in some cases, it makes sense to use maybe a percentage of recycled content. Sometimes it makes sense to do what we've done is we've partnered with Repurpose Global. They're selling that ocean-bound plastic to helping that facilitate that to other industries that can use that, furniture, that sort of thing. And then we're able to provide a credit, an offset credit for that. So it's pretty amazing. There are a lot of things that, like, I don't know if you know, Windex Bottles has committed to converting all of their bottles to be made with ocean-bound plastic. That's perfect, right? I can't think of a better item that should be made out of ocean-bound plastic, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So it's a it and our commitment to sustainability isn't just the ocean-bound plastic. It's like I said, it's the first question I always ask, and there are a lot of things that you can do. I worked with a customer last year, a CPG customer, where we had them send 100 current SKUs, and we were able to find 25 SKUs that we were able to reduce by anywhere from 10 to 25% the size of the package. So
Wow.
I saved the customer money, but then I used, 25% less packaging. That's actually the biggest thing that you can do from a sustainability perspective. Absolutely.
How much plastic has been removed from the waste stream that you've prevented from the ocean waste stream? Do you know that offhand?
I don't know, but I can find out.
Okay. I
Um,
was.
the facility has only been 100% up and running, like perfect, for a little over a year. It was a pretty big investment.
Do you know of any other waste streams that could be potential targets for other sustainable packaging?
Like, what do you mean?
Well, I
Like,
mean,
other
like
than ocean?
other than ocean bound plastics, like other things that could be potential targets to be recycled into packaging, like other other waste?
There's some, a lot of people do things with bagasse, which
Mhm.
is the leftover from sugarcane.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew that or not.
No idea.
Um, oh yeah. So when you're extracting the sugar from the sugarcane, what you have left of the plant is called bagasse. Um, and that can be made into paper. I think that long term there will be a lot of opportunities for hemp paper to be used in things. It's just not there yet. The problem is particularly with hemp is that the cost is so high because there's just not enough. When you have critical mass, then the cost goes down, and then you have the ability to make other things. Canaf, which is corn. One of the things that's really interesting that's coming online are people doing things with mushroom fiber, with like for cushioning, right?
Oh, okay.
There's a really cool company I think they're in Australia. I don't think they're in New Zealand. I could be wrong. It's one of the two. I know that's terrible. And they're doing some pretty cool things with that. Um, I've been talking to them for probably 3 years. They're just now to the point of being able to do that. Paper foam is something that's really interesting too. In all of those cases, the difficulty is, tooling costs and in the case of the mushroom, that all that fiber is being those plants are in currently in Southeast Asia, and I believe they're building a plant in Malaysia, and I know the other ones in either Australia or New Zealand. Um, I wouldn't want to do that for something here because I just don't want to pay it. I wouldn't want to ship it, right? It would be awesome when that eventually gets to the point where that could be made in North America, like in the US or Mexico. Mexico is probably a great fit for that. So I think that there's awesome things on the horizon. The other thing that's pretty cool is that there's a lot of development going on compostable film. And there are challenges with compostable film from a freshness perspective, right? It's not a great fit for potato chips, right? They get near humidity and those things go stale. It's not going to be a great fit for any kind of gummies, cannabis or not, right? Any kind of snacks, that stuff. Right now, the problem is by nature, it starts to break down the moment it's made. So when you think about it, you can't have anything where that barrier can get through. So I truly believe that, and that could happen within the next couple of years. And then the other thing is that we talked about states working together on the cannabis side. States also need to work together in terms of, or municipalities working together to make recycling and composting easier.
Mm. No, I think that's one of the sort of the veil was lifted on recycling efforts, and I know that once people realize that maybe I think people maybe ignorantly have that belief that anything that goes into that blue bin gets recycled, and I think as more has come out about how much we really still need to invest in a recycling infrastructure, I don't know. I think it kind of took the wind out of some people's sails.
Yeah, and I think the hard part too is so having spent a majority of my life in the Pacific Northwest, you can recycle and compost anything, right? And it's actually a revenue stream for the state of Seattle on the composting, which is awesome, right? And you get used to the fact that you can compost and recycle almost anything, and the things they can't tell yet you can get rid well to be on your front porch where you can put stuff that wouldn't that like saran wrap and some other stuff, and they have other streams for being able to find sources for a path for that. There's a place in Seattle where you can take your styrofoam if you get styrofoam. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. Electronics. There's just so many options here, and there are a couple other cities like this too. And then, and then living part time in Fort Lauderdale, where the recycling options are not as awesome. And I sent a letter to the city when I moved there about adding a composting program, and I'm sure they laughed at me. But but I mean, those are things you just look at the difference between what's accessible in Europe in terms of being able to recycle and compost versus what's accessible here. Um, it's frustrating.
Well, at least the letter was entered into the record, you know?
I'm sure I gave somebody great humor that night. They probably took it to happy hour.
Um, well, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I know that I've taken a lot of it. And there are many things that I wanted to cover, which I hope that we could cover in maybe a subsequent episode. But I mean, before we get out of here, is there anything that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or your work at AE Global?
Sure. The best way to get a hold of me is actually through LinkedIn. It's just the easiest. Elizabeth Corbett, it's easy to find me. Um, I think I said my goal was find a way to yes and provide a complete solution. And if I can't do it or my company can't do it, we will find you the person who can. And that's really there are so many people for whom I am the first call, and maybe I'm not the right one, and I'll find you who the right person is if I'm not it for whatever that challenge is.
Well, I think on two different prongs, the sustainability efforts that you guys offer, as well as, I mean, when you talk about the availability or the possibility of cutting 25% of the packaging out of SKUs, I mean, that's a real difference maker for operators that are kind of working on really tight margins.
It is, and honestly, we talked about this a couple of times, and this kind of goes more into your bailiwick, but really understanding what your challenges are from an operations perspective. Because the largest cost in the cannabis industry is the product itself, and the second largest spend is labor. And so, if there is, and labor in cannabis is still really hard to find. And so if you're in a lot of cities like Seattle, where, the average hourly wage is 20 or $25 an hour, and you are having a hard time finding somebody, and we can find a way to help you maybe, eliminate the need for that space that you've been having a hard time filling anyway. That's a big, big, it's a big deal maker.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. But I feel like I could talk to you for hours.
Thanks, David. We can talk again.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. All right. For Elizabeth Corbett, President of Enterprise Sales at AE Global, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.